In the far corner of the known galaxy, there was a forgotten planet named E17, a rocky sphere covered in dust storms and lifeless valleys, ignored by most maps and remembered only in military archives. It had no strategic value, no mining resources, no weather systems to study, yet it was the place Daniel had been ordered to go, not by choice, not by fate, but as punishment for a decision that saved lives but disobeyed the chain of command. He had been a soldier trained by the book, raised on orders and missions, breathing protocol since his early youth when he joined the service, not out of pride, but out of a promise to protect what mattered. Yet, when that promise clashed with the superior's flawed command, Daniel made a choice that cost him more than he imagined. He rerouted a supply ship during a skirmish, saving 100 colonists from burning to death in a transport ambush, but in doing so ignored direct instructions to secure a weapons drop. Instead, the weapons were destroyed. The commanding officer's pride wounded, and Daniel was charged with insubordination. There was a court hearing, brief and cold. The panel of officers watched him like a nuisance. Their decision already written, he was offered two choices: either face 5 years in a cold space cell, or serve a 2-year assignment alone on E17, an old outpost station, barely functioning, buried in sandstorms and isolated from all major traffic. No communication, no support, no return until the term ended. Daniel chose exile over a prison wall. At least he would have air, sky, and some freedom, even if it was among rocks and silence. He was given basic supplies, food for 6 months, tools for repairs, a beacon that worked only for emergencies, and a single weapon to protect from nothing, since the planet was classified as empty, lifeless, irrelevant to anyone, except as a place to send mistakes like him. When the transport pod dropped him onto E17 and lifted off, the silence was overwhelming. The outpost was small, a concrete dome with a cracked solar array, some old machinery humming weakly, and the wind never stopped blowing red dust against the metal walls. Daniel entered the station, powered up the systems, cleaned out the old gear, and tried to settle in. But the emptiness was a weight pressing into his chest, a loneliness louder than any battle cry he had ever known. Days turned to weeks. He kept a log, adjusted the solar panels, repaired the broken antennas, none of them connected to any real network. But routine gave him something to do at night. He cooked the dried food, read the few old books on the console, and stared out at the horizon. A never-ending stretch of rust-colored hills and shifting sand. But somewhere deep inside, the quiet felt wrong. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from emptiness. It was the kind that felt watched, listened to, like something else breathed beneath the ground. One night, while he was checking the perimeter lights, a sound caught his ear, faint, barely there, but enough to make him pause. It was not the wind, not metal creaking, but a rhythmic tapping like stone against stone, coming from the northern ridge. He walked toward it, slow, careful, his weapon at his side. But when he reached the top, there was nothing, just a few scattered rocks and footprints that were not his. They were too wide, too deep, and the pattern was not human. He returned to the station with a pulse racing, though he tried to tell himself it was old animal marks or weather erosion. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few days, strange things happened. A wrench disappeared from his workbench, then returned the next morning in a different spot. A bag of dried food was torn open and the storage unit tools he hadn't touched in weeks were suddenly missing, then back in their place, perfectly cleaned. He ran diagnostics, checked for system hacks. Nothing showed up, no life forms, no movement, no explanations. Then the transmitter failed. He had been sending routine logs into the void, knowing they were likely going nowhere. But when he tried to test the signal again, there was nothing but static. It wasn't a power issue. It wasn't technical, he knew. The patterns of breakdown, this was different, like someone was jamming it from the outsides. So he began leaving small items outside, near the ridge where he found the footprints, just to see what would happen. A metal cup, a piece of mirror, some protein bars. They vanished by the next morning, and in their place there were objects, smooth black stones, etched with symbols, small crystal shapes that pulsed with dim light, pieces of metal folded in ways No human hand could mimic. Each item was placed neatly in the same spot every time, as if arranged with care. Daniel didn't know who or what was taking them or leaving gifts in return. But something was out there. Something that knew he was here. Something that was watching and now communicating in the only way it could. He began speaking aloud to the air, just small things like "I got your gift," or "I left you food," or "I'm not your enemy." He didn't know if they understood, but it helped ease the isolation, and for the first time in weeks he didn't feel entirely alone that night. Before sleeping, he stepped outside, looked at the stars, barely visible through the red clouds, and whispered into the wind, "I wasn't supposed to find anyone here, and I wasn't supposed to matter anymore. Maybe they sent me here to vanish, to disappear. But if you're out there, I won't run. I want to know who you are behind the hills." A soft glow flickered, then vanished, too quick for a machine, too graceful for anything human. Daniel stepped back inside, heart pounding, unsure if he had just imagined it. But one thing was certain: this planet wasn't empty, and his punishment was about to become something far bigger than he had ever imagined. Morning came quietly as the red sun rose over the dusty horizon, casting long shadows across the broken ridges and the metallic shell of the outpost. Daniel stood near the edge of the hill where he had left the items the day before, his eyes searching the sand for signs again. Just as before, the items were gone, and something else had been placed there in return. This time, it was a curved shard made of a material he couldn't name. It was warm to the touch, with lines running across its surface, like veins glowing faintly in colors. His eyes could barely track not just light, but something beyond. It's something he felt more than saw. Daniel took it back inside, examined it. Under the console scanner, which gave no reading, the material was not listed in any known database. And it did not reflect normal light. It was like it was alive yet motionless. Like it had memory, but no mind. He sat in silence, turning it in his hand, wondering if this was a message, a sign, or a warning. The night before had been quiet, no sounds, no flickers, but the feeling that he was not alone had grown stronger, not threatening, just present, like a steady breath behind his shoulder. He placed the shard on the table, next to the other objects collected over the past days. They had grown into a small collection: tools, stone symbols, none of them human, none of them random. They were always placed with care, always in the same location, and only taken when he left something first. It had become a rhythm, a silent trade, a slow conversation through objects instead of words. And though no one had appeared in the open, yet Daniel knew they were near, watching, listening, studying him as much as he tried to understand them. He adjusted the cameras, pointed them toward the ridge, and set them to night scan, then checked the logs again. The transmitter was still blocked. Every attempt to send out a message was met with static, not just blocked, but looped, like the signal was being trapped inside a cage. The system told him the station was operational, but he could not reach beyond the sky, as if someone had locked the door from outside and swallowed the key. At night, the air turned colder, the wind sharper. Daniel sat by the window, if it could be called that, a thick glass panel barely wider than a helmet, reinforced and scratched by years of storms, yet it was his only view of the stars and whatever moved in the shadows of the ridge. He didn't sleep. Instead, he kept the lights low, eyes fixed on the monitors. The feed was grainy, full of dust, but at exactly 2 hours past midnight, something moved across the screen. A tall shape, thin like a reed but with structure, walking upright, its head turning toward the camera, though the distance was too far to make out details. Daniel did not react instantly. He simply stared, holding his breath, then rewound the footage. Again and again the figure moved from left to right, paused, turned, then vanished beyond the scanner range. It had arms, long and jointed legs that bent slightly backward, and something on its back that shifted like folded wings, or maybe a device. It made no sound, and no heat signature followed it. The system marked it as an unknown anomaly, then cleared it without warning, as if something inside the outpost tried to erase the record. He copied the footage to an external drive, then disconnected it, hiding it in a compartment beneath the bunk. Something told him the outpost was not fully under his control. Maybe it never had been. Maybe His punishment had come with silent strings, to make sure he stayed cut off from the rest of the world. And now those strings were tightening. The next day he went to the ridge for the first time, walking slow, hands open, no weapon in sight. He left a container of clean water and a folded thermal cloth, both lightweight, easy to carry, and useful in cold nights. He placed them on the flat stone where the others had been taken, then stepped back 20 paces and waited. The sun was high, but the air felt still. Not empty, just holding its breath. He sat for hours, not moving, not blinking too long, until finally, just before dusk, a shape appeared, not from the sky, not from the sand, but from behind a boulder that had looked like part of the landscape until it moved. It was one of them, the same form as in the video. Tall, with long limbs, skin like glass and stone fused into one. Their surface shimmered without reflection, eyes deep and full of shifting patterns like swirling liquid. They did not speak, did not gesture, but simply stood near the stone, then picked up the water and cloth, turned their gaze toward Daniel, and remained still for what felt like minutes. Daniel did not move either. He wanted to speak, but the silence felt sacred. Breaking it might shatter the moment, so he waited until the figure placed something else on the stone, a small orb-shaped object that pulsed softly, then turned and walked away, vanishing behind the rock. Again, like a shadow fading into dusk, Daniel approached only after the figure disappeared, picked up the orb, and felt a warmth flow through his fingers, then up his arm, into his chest, like a low hum of energy, not dangerous, not overwhelming, just present. He brought it inside, placed it beside the shard, and watched as the orb lit up, projecting a faint hologram into the air. The image was unclear shapes, rotating lines, intersecting and shifting, a form of writing, maybe, or a map, or a pattern of stars. He recorded everything, not sure what it meant, but knowing it mattered. That night he spoke aloud again, this time not just into the wind, but directly into the darkness. Beyond the glass I saw you. I do not wish to harm you. I do not speak for the others, but I speak for myself. I was sent here as punishment, not by choice, not for discovery. But if we are to meet, then let it be with respect and understanding. He paused, then added, if you can hear me, if you can understand, then let this be the start, not the end. Far beyond the ridge, a single light blinked once, then again, then went dark, and Daniel knew the silence had answered, and this time it was listening. The sun rose slowly over the dry ridges as Daniel stepped out of the outpost, his boots pressing into the soft dust, his eyes fixed on the flat stone where the silent exchange had been taking place. Every morning he came out with something in his hand, something useful or thoughtful or strange, and every evening he returned to find something new left behind, a silent pattern that continued without a single word spoken, yet spoke louder than any conversation he had ever known. And today was no different. The thermal cloth he had left 2 nights ago was gone, and in its place was a small cube, not smooth or glowing, but covered in small carvings that almost looked like fingerprints, hundreds of them pressed into its surface as if passed down from many hands over generations. Daniel held the cube carefully, wondering if this one held more meaning than the others, because everything he had received so far had seemed like pieces of a larger puzzle, a language of objects slowly forming a picture he could not yet see. He returned to the station and placed the cube on the workbench, connecting it to the external scanner. The system tried to identify the material, but again failed. The readings were too low, too clean, too perfect, not matching anything in the military or civilian database. He tried to open it, but it remained solid, unmoving, yet he felt something as he touched it, not heat, not cold, but a kind of pressure, like the object was aware that it was being studied, not hostile, just awake. Later that evening, while sorting the collected objects, he decided to organize them by shape and function. He noticed a pattern. Some of the objects, when placed close together, reacted by vibrating gently or flashing colors, and when he placed the cube near the orb from the day before, both pieces activated together. The orb projected its hologram again, but this time it was clearer. Shapes became outlines. Outlines became structures. A map began to form in front of his eyes, not a map of the stars, but of the planet itself, E17, with detailed underground tunnels, mountains, energy flows, and something marked deep within the northern ridge, a location blinking slowly like a pulse. Daniel stared at it for minutes, heart beating fast, knowing that the answer to why they had chosen to approach him might lie at that blinking point. It was not random, not decorative. It was an invitation or a message, or maybe a test, whatever it was. It told him that they had chosen to reveal something, and that meant trust, a trust he had to meet with equal courage. He packed basic gear, water tools, the emergency beacon, even though it still could not break through the jammed signal, and early the next morning he left the outpost, walking toward the marked location in the northern ridge. The journey was slow, the wind strong and full of sand, but he moved with purpose, guided by the projection copied onto his wrist screen. The terrain shifted as he moved higher. Jagged rocks and deep crevices began to appear until he reached a cliff wall shaped like a natural arc. At first glance, it looked like part of the mountain, but as he walked closer, he noticed lines too straight to be natural, etched into the stone with precision, a doorway that had been sealed not by force, but by design. As he touched the wall, it responded with a soft sound, a tone that resonated through his chest. Then the cube in his backpack began to glow softly, and without warning, the stone doorway started to shift, not outward, not inward, but folding in on itself, revealing a passage dimly lit by lights embedded in the walls. No cables, no panels, just light itself flowing through the surface like water. Daniel stepped inside, heart pounding, unsure if he was being welcomed or simply watched, but every step forward felt like a decision already made long before he arrived. Tunnel was quiet and dry, the air surprisingly fresh. As he moved deeper, following the gentle slope downward, the lights changed color slowly, from soft white to a pale blue, and finally to green. And at the end of the tunnel, he found a chamber, round and massive, with a ceiling lost in shadow, and walls covered in symbols glowing faintly. Around the room stood tall figures, the same as the one he had seen before, and more like them, each one silent, each one still, their bodies faintly pulsing with inner light, as if their energy lived just beneath their skin. Daniel stood in the center, waiting, unsure what to say, or if saying anything was even right. Then one of the figures stepped forward and reached out, not to him, but to the orb he had placed on the floor. It hovered gently in the air, spun slowly, and released a new projection, this one showing Earth, its orbit, satellites, human cities, colonies in deep space, then images of war-burning ships, abandoned outposts, broken agreements. The figure turned to Daniel, and though it made no sound, he understood the meaning, not through words but through images and feeling they had watched for a long time. They had seen what humanity had done, both good and bad. They feared the worst, but had seen something different in him. Figure placed its hand on Daniel's shoulder gently and showed another image, not war, not fear, but connection. Humans and their kind standing together, working, learning, building something new. The vision was not clear, not a prophecy, just a possibility, and it was up to him to make it real. Daniel nodded once slowly, and the chamber lights grew brighter as if in approval. The cube on the floor split open, revealing a small device which the figure handed to him. No explanation, no instruction, yet somehow he knew what it was: a key to break the signal lock around the planet, a way to speak to Earth again. But only if he chose to do so. As he walked back toward the surface, guided by one of the beings, he looked around one last time at the place no human had ever seen before, and felt something inside shift, not just wonder, but a deep sense of responsibility. He had not been sent here to suffer, not by chance, not by punishment, but because fate had placed him in the one place where peace could begin, quietly, away from command and orders. And now he held the one thing that could change the future of two worlds. When he reached the outpost again, the wind had calmed, and the sky above was darker than usual, stars beginning to appear across the sky, and Daniel stood outside for a long time, device in hand, the decision not yet made, but already burning in his heart, because this was not just about him anymore. This was about first contact, about trust, about what came next. And for the first time in a long while, he was no longer alone in that choice. Daniel stood at the edge of the outpost, under the deepening sky, holding the device in his hand, its shape smooth and cold, yet humming faintly like a heart waiting to be awakened. It had no buttons, no screen, but when he focused on it, the inner glow responded, as if it understood his thoughts, as if it knew he was not just carrying it, he was now responsible for it. The silence of E17 surrounded him again, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full of questions, full of unseen eyes, full of decisions waiting to be made, and now everything rested on what he would choose to do next. He walked slowly back inside, set the device on the table, and stared at it for hours, wondering what message would reach Earth if he broke the signal lock, wondering who would receive it first, the military command that had sentenced him here, or the public who might finally hear the truth, wondering if they would believe him, if they would see the aliens as a threat, or as something different, something possible, something like hope. He opened his logs, rewrote. His reports included everything he had seen, everything he had received, the symbols, the figures, the chamber under the ridge, the silent exchange of gifts, the message shown in the vision about peace and fear and choice. He attached every bit of data from the orb, from the cube, from the outpost scanners, and copied it onto 3 separate drives, then stored them in different compartments, knowing that even if someone tried to erase the truth, one copy would remain. He looked again at the stars above, knowing that somewhere out there patrol ships flew past the outer rim, unaware of what was happening here, maybe searching, maybe returning from distant missions, maybe getting closer to this place without knowing its value. Then late that night, the sensors picked up movement, a ship entering orbit, not large, but active, sending routine pings across empty space. And for a moment, Daniel's heart froze, because he recognized the signal, not an enemy, not a stranger, but one of Earth's patrol ships sweeping across uncharted zones on a scheduled flyby, not looking for him, not expecting him, not even aware that anyone was down here alive. Daniel had a choice now. He could use the device to break the jam, call the ship, send a message, ask for rescue, and deliver the data. But if he did that without care, they would come down fast and armed. They would scan the surface, bring machines, search for anything not human. They would see the alien objects as weapons, the tunnels as hidden threats, and the beings as targets before anyone could explain, before anyone could understand. It would be too late the moment contact became official. It would turn into a report, a meeting, a vote, maybe even a conflict. And that was not what the others had shown him. They had given trust, not because they were weak, but because they still hoped. They had waited in silence, hidden under the dust, because they had feared war. And now one wrong move could confirm their worst fear. He stepped outside again, the stars brighter now, and the patrol ship slowly circling above its light, faint but steady. He activated the device, held it up, and waited. It responded with a slow pulse, and then a wave of warmth spread across his body as the signal interference around the outpost began to collapse. The static faded from the console. The old beacon light flickered for the first time in months. The communication array lit up, 1 bar, then 2, then full signal. He was no longer cut off. He could speak to Earth with 1 word, but he said nothing yet. He paused instead and opened a private channel, unencrypted, raw and simple, then began to record. My name is Daniel. I was sent here as punishment for disobeying orders. I came alone. I was supposed to serve in silence and return forgotten. But something happened that no one planned. Something real, something that changed what we thought we knew. I made contact with intelligent beings, not like us, but not dangerous, not hostile. They have been here longer than we have, hiding, watching, afraid, and for good reason. We've brought war to every new place we've found, we've claimed, without listening, and taken without asking. But they reached out, not to our fleets, not to our leaders, but to one person left behind, and they trusted me. He paused, then continued. I'm sending everything I've recorded, everything I've seen, every sign, every wordless message. I'm not asking for approval. I'm not calling for rescue. I'm sharing what I was given, because it does not belong to me alone, and if we respond with fear, then all This will be lost not just for them, but for us too. This is our chance not just to meet something new, but to become something better. He ended the message and sent it across all civilian open channels, not the military grid, not encrypted, not restricted. It would take longer to spread, but once it reached enough ears it would be impossible to bury. Then he turned off the beacon, shut down the relay, and buried the device deep under the outpost with a small symbol drawn above it, the same symbol the others had left in the sand days ago, one that meant safe or peace, or maybe simply begin. By the next morning, the sky had changed. Patrol ships still circled, but now the scanners were active, the quiet net full of incoming pings, messages, requests, alerts. Earth knew he was alive. They had heard the broadcast. Some wanted to celebrate, some demanded answers, and some warned of punishment again for going outside protocol, but it no longer mattered. Daniel had already done what needed to be done. He had already delivered the message. He had already made contact. Not between species, but between possibilities, and whatever happened next would happen not in silence, not in exile, but in the open, where truth could no longer be hidden, and where peace could finally begin to grow. From the ridge above the station, a soft light blinked once, then again, then vanished, and Daniel turned toward it, knowing they were still watching, still waiting, not with fear, but with hope. Because the decision had been made, and the door was now open, not for him alone, but for all of them. The outpost stood silent beneath the pale sky, its surface covered with dust, and the marks of wind that had shaped the land for centuries. Yet deep inside, it now held a different kind of silence, not the lonely kind Daniel had known when he first arrived, but the silence that comes after something important. Has been said, the kind of silence that holds the weight of choice and the echo of something new. His message had been sent, his story now carried across hundreds of channels, slowly reaching the outer colonies, the trade hubs, the border stations, and the civilian worlds where curious minds listened more than they judged. Daniel watched from the observation port as the Earth patrol ship moved lower, its lights flashing across the ridges, scanning the terrain with a caution that revealed their confusion. Their orbit had grown slower, their signals less direct, as if they had received his message, and now circled not in command, but in hesitation. He did not know how much they believed or what their orders were, but something had shifted. He could feel it in the delay, in the silence, in the way they no longer tried to land without notice. 3 days passed without direct contact, but on the 4th morning, a new signal reached the outpost, a simple request for communication. No demands, no threats, just a request from the patrol ship above, asking for Daniel to respond. He waited a while, thinking, not because of fear, but because every step now mattered. One wrong word could undo all that had been built with patience and respect. He activated the console and opened a clear channel using only the simplest words. I am here, I am well, I am not alone. The response came within seconds, a voice he did not recognize. Male, calm, slightly unsure, asking for confirmation of the earlier transmission, asking if the data was real, if the beings he described were still near, if they had shown aggression or signs of danger. Daniel answered only what needed to be said. They made contact in peace. They offered knowledge. They chose me because I was alone, not because I was powerful, and they remain hidden by choice, not by fear. He added that their trust must not be broken, not by ships, not by weapons, not by assumption. Voice asked if the location was safe for landing. Daniel replied that it was safe for him, but not yet safe for others, not until promises were made, not until understanding replaced fear. And after a long pause, the signal ended with the patrol ship acknowledging his message and promising not to descend without permission. And then it rose again, disappearing into orbit, leaving behind only the soft hum of stars above and a trail of questions that would travel faster than light within weeks. The story began to spread. It reached the news feeds and science forums. It reached students and diplomats. It reached those who had long dreamed of life beyond their own world, and those who had feared it for different reasons. It reached the high councils and the private channels of corporations and military networks, and everywhere it When it brought both doubt and hope, because the idea of first contact was no longer theory, no longer myth, it was real, and it had come not through war, not through conquest, but through exile, through one man left behind. Daniel remained on E17 by choice no longer, trapped no longer sentenced but committed, because trust once given cannot be thrown away. The others returned each night in silence, bringing new items, showing him new symbols, allowing him to record new images. He became a student in their world, learning not through speech but through patterns, through energy, through shared memory, and in return he gave them pieces of earth, nothing dangerous, nothing corrupted, just small things, drawings, photos, seeds, music, sounds of rain, and voices of children, things that carried no weapon, only feeling. And slowly a bond grew, not of politics, not of technology, but of simple human presence. Months passed, and the quiet relationship remained undisturbed until a small civilian team requested permission to visit, not to claim or survey, but to witness and listen. And only when Daniel confirmed their purpose did the others agree. The team arrived with only what they could carry: cameras, tools, books, translators, nothing that could harm or threaten, and they stayed for days, walking among the ridges, sitting by the outpost, watching the lights in the hills where the others waited, never appearing fully, but always nearby, always watching, always learning. The recordings made during that visit showed no creatures, no full view of alien life, but what they did show was enough objects that moved, without force, structures that shimmered with light, that bent differently, plants that responded to sound and heat, and symbols carved in places no human hand could reach. It was not proof for every scientist or leader, but it was enough to shift the conversation from disbelief to possibility. And for the first time in a long time, the galaxy did not talk about expansion or dominance, but about invitation, about understanding, something older and wiser that had chosen not to reveal itself until it found a reason to hope. Daniel's name became known, not as a hero, not as a leader, but as a bridge, a quiet man who had once broken a rule to save lives and was punished for it, yet somehow through that punishment had found the path to something greater. He was asked to return to Earth, offered honors, seats in councils, offers to lead new missions, but he declined all of them politely, with no bitterness, only clarity. He belonged where the conversation had started, among the hills and winds of E17, where silence had first spoken back to him. Years later, the first official alliance was signed, not with governments or armies, but with a shared code of respect between Earth and the others, a promise to approach with care, to listen before speaking, to share before asking, to give before taking. And Daniel was there, not as a representative, but as a witness, standing on the same ground where it had all begun, his eyes still searching the horizon for new signs, his hands still tracing the symbols left for him, each one a reminder that even in exile, even in isolation, something greater can be born. And as the twin moons of E17 rose behind him, casting soft shadows over the outpost and the stones below, Daniel stood still one more time, listening to the quiet wind, feeling the pulse of something ancient and kind, and knowing without doubt that what had begun as a punishment had become the first step into a future none of them had expected, and all of them had been waiting for. The end.